Welcome back to the PoPCast. I'm Travis, joined as always by Whitney, and today we have a very special guest, our fellow Patterns of Power author, Caroline Sweet. Caroline is the co-author of Patterns of Power and Espanol, inviting bilingual writers into the conventions of Spanish, as well as the upcoming Patterns of Wonder and Espanol, inviting emergent bilingual writers to play with the conventions of Spanish for grades pre-K through 1. She brings a wealth of experience as a dual language educator and instructional coach who has spent her entire career working in Title I settings with multilingual learners. In this episode, we're stepping back from the practical how-to conversations we often have and asking a bigger question. What does the power in Patterns of Power actually mean? We talk a lot about the patterns, the instructional process, but today Caroline helps us unpack the deeper purpose behind this work. How grammar instruction can either restrict or liberate young writers, and how teachers can shift the power dynamic in their classrooms to honor the linguistic resources students bring with them. So, let's get into it. Listeners, today we are joined by Caroline, Whitney, and myself. We are together to talk about the power of Patterns of Power.
That's really it. Yeah. The power part. Because we talk a lot about the patterns. Right. But what does it mean to take on this power of language? And so thank you, Travis, for just kind of letting me talk about the things that are always on my mind. And I think a lot, especially as an educator who's only worked in Title I settings with multilingual learners for every moment of my career, I think a lot about how an English language arts classroom can be a place that is very restrictive, that is subtractive in nature, where children of color might not find comfort, safety, space to take on reading and writing as something that enriches their life. I think that's why we push into the work in the way we do. This method of teaching grammar that Jeff has worked on for decades, that we have worked on in this last decade, just a very different approach. And I get so sad when I go into classrooms and they're looking at a new adoption and it looks like the old one.
With some digital resources.
Yeah, and there's some slides and it's still a string of disconnected sentences that don't build on a story, fill in the blank. I think we all believe that is not the type of grammar exercise that lets children flourish and develop and push forward as writers, right?
I think too, if we think about maybe a traditional English classroom's power dynamic, the classrooms that we spent our time in as students, maybe some that we see as well in our work with teachers, there is that dynamic of the teacher as the owner of the knowledge who is going to bestow that knowledge on the students so that students in that kind of empty vessel belief, right? We're looking at the deficits that students come in with, what they don't know. I think we've maybe had conversations sitting with teachers in our PLCs, supporting other teachers of, well, how can we get here if our students, they don't even know how to find the subject?
We're not going to begin their sentence with a capital letter.
Exactly. All of the deficits that exist within that. So I think that kind of flies in the face of this process that we present because it begins with an invitation. If I think back to when I first asked Jeff, when we were working together, where did the idea of the invitation come from? He talked about finding that from Harry Wong's work in the first days of school, right? The invitation
to sit at your desk, the invitation to move to the car break. That's the invitation.
I'm inviting you in to have that conversation, I think is a powerful shift away from, okay, students, it's grammar time now, so get your workbooks out and turn to page 3 and everyone be quiet.
Letting the students speak first in our grammar lessons is like the most important shift. And then that we encourage teachers to let students speak for that 10 minutes. And this is just 10 minutes a day, right? And that is by design so that it's accessible, so that teachers in many different spaces with many different programs can use this. But just to open our lesson, letting students speak first, I think is the most essential shift. When I walk into a space as a native speaker of English, as a white woman who wasn't the first generation to go to college, I carry a high level of privilege, and I think it's pretty apparent to students that I utilize conventional language. But I think because that power dynamic could be so stilted in a room full of multilingual learners, it is essential for me as a white woman carrying privilege to pause, to listen, and to hear everything my students know about language before I ever speak. And that's in English and in Spanish, just to let them say everything they know about language. And I think the more that teachers do that, the less we hear teachers in PLC engage in that kind of deficit thinking of they don't even start a sentence with a capital letter. They don't even know how to capitalize names. Literally ask them. They're going to tell you in our lessons, and they do know. But when are they going to feel that it's important to engage in conventional writing?
It's a great point. Yeah, that invitation to notice, I think that is a powerful introduction to that, giving students some of that power in the classroom, inviting them and opening that up to them. I think
Or
about
acknowledging that they're coming powerful.
acknowledging that they are coming powerful.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's this moment in time where I've reserved this part of the day because you carry so much knowledge about language and languages, and I'm ready to hear it. We're ready to hear it.
Right? And during that work, you notice at the beginning, they're still waiting for you
Yeah.
to give them that direction. But once they understand what you notice actually means, then it becomes about them and they're willing to share what they know and what they're discovering and even what they're curious about when it comes to language.
I like, too, the kind of community accountability it creates. And I know that's something that's really important to us in writing classrooms is really creating that community of writers and then us participating as part of that community that we are growing as writers too. And that's a really important shift that Jeff has, definitely coached teachers on for decades. But when students are hearing what their peers know about language, then we all start to get some accountability of like, yeah, we do know that we use capital letters at the beginning of this.
That's been exciting.
You know that.
Actually, I've heard you say that many times. Yep, we do know that.
And don't say, yes, I do use capital letters at the beginning of my sentences, even though they don't always.
I think too, Travis, that within the invitation to notice that very first step, if we are coming at it from a place of genuine curiosity and wanting to know what our students know about language and languages, then we resist the urge to put it into a worksheet or to have a student copy a sentence. We don't need those other things that feel school-like. We need to hear what they have to say and really take that in as practitioners to know that next best step.
So as we have the invitation and notice, one of the things is the choice of text that we choose to use for those model sentences. And where's the importance of that? And not just choosing any book or one that we've always used over and over and over again, but really thinking about the students in front of us with that as well.
Absolutely. And I think that's honestly my favorite part of planning is digging through books, looking at new books, seeing which authors and illustrators are giving us something to go from, where I get at my other goal of really building my community of writers and especially bilingual writers who live a writerly life. There's this quote from Jeff, every sentence holds a truth about writing if we only pay attention. And I always think about how, yeah, that's absolutely true. I can look at any sentence. I could look at a travel brochure and understand things about language, structures of language, conventions of language. But what we have been so careful about is making sure that we're not just picking any sentence, but that we're picking sentences that elevate authors' craft, that let students know that their stories are important and that they can actually use conventions to convey their stories, to share their voice. And so the literature choices are absolutely like the foundation of the lessons that we're teaching in a grammar lesson. That's really divergent from grammar curriculums that you will see, where texts or small excerpts might not be from authentic literature. It might be AI created at this point
Yes.
and feel really disconnected and irrelevant to students' lived experiences. And that's just not going to fly for us.
Running parallel in the world of just getting students into engaging texts. We want students to have access to mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. I think that's something to be mindful of as we are planning. We want students to be able to see themselves in the text that they interact with and they read, but also to be able to see possibility, to see other people's lived experiences and be able to think about how are those experiences similar and different to mine.
I'll be honest, Travis, when I think about mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors through Dean Sims Bishop, pinnacle work.
Shout out.
As a dual language bilingual educator, what I really want to emphasize is mirrors. I know my students are going to travel through their K-12 journey and experience many windows and look at how other people live and read about that often. So I want to maximize the time that I have to make sure that there are abundant mirrors. That way my young writers know that their stories matter, that their voices are important. The linguistic diversity that they bring into the classroom is valued, can be written, can be published, and consumed by big audiences. And so when I'm thinking about literature choices, specifically in a bilingual classroom, I always default to mirrors.
And I want to think too, when I'm choosing text, my mirror is going to be very different from the mirrors of a lot of the students that I teach. And so I think it's really important that when we think about mirrors, we're thinking about the students' mirrors.
Absolutely.
It's really been a focus for me over the past probably 7 or 8 years of really making that more of a point of whose mirrors am I using here.
And I want to go deeper on that, Whitney. I'm not just looking for like recognizable foods or certain types of names. I'm looking for deeper things of family dynamics, of lived experiences, of threads of culture that go back generations and the way that generations build out stories over time. And so we want that as that analysis of, is this book a mirror, to be something pretty deep. And to do that, you have to know your students. To know your students, you got to let them talk. And so that is all connected in the ways that we approach grammar teaching in our classrooms.
Love it.
I want to bring up something else. In supporting teachers, and especially teachers at the elementary level, I think teachers sometimes don't feel fully confident in their knowledge of language conventions. And I think maybe I experienced that in my world of dual language where, I enter a space as a native English speaker with less confidence in Spanish. My colleagues might enter a space as a native Spanish speaker with less confidence in English. Part of the patterns of power process allows the teacher to analyze a pattern and a convention in a way that they maybe haven't done before. When I work with young teachers who may lack confidence about their content knowledge in any subject, that's when they get nervous. That's when they shut down. That's when there's confusion and kind of a lack of clarity in lessons. But I think that with our process, you're able to build your own understanding about language. And then in the invitation to imitate together, we're literally doing that together. We are co-creating that in that moment. We're all going to try on this pattern. And if that's a pattern that I haven't used as an individual very often, I'm going to try it too. And that risk and space is there for me.
And I love that because as a teacher, that is a time where you're thinking aloud and you're going through those same struggles that your students might go through as well. And it's so important for our students to see that. As we're thinking through how might we use that pattern, what would it look like? Oh, we could try it this way. Oh, but we could also try it this way. Well, that one makes more sense. A lot of times that's just us thinking aloud. Oh, yeah, that is something. Oh, but this is better. I should try this. It's important that our students recognize that we don't know everything and that we're still learning as well. And writers in general are constantly changing their thinking and their ways of trying different things out. So I think it's important for our students to see that.
Well, I think too, teachers, if you are listening and you are thinking about, oh, that kind of speaks to me a little bit. I'm not quite there with certain conventions of language. I'm not quite sure how to present that. this process is set up to support you as well as a co-learner in this space. So talking about being able to think through this first, to share in that learning with students, to help them affirm that work, and then the process of imitating, of applying it in your own writing. I think that just really elevates you as a writer in the classroom as well, to have students see you in that vein, not just as the teacher who's dishing out the grades, but as another writer in the classroom whose voice is going to be respected in that same way.
You know, we say one of the ways you can ruin a writing classroom is to flood your lessons with abstract terminology. But I think it is lessons flooded with
So true.
abstract terminology that are really off-putting to teachers. And what I see is if a teacher doesn't feel confident in their own writing ability, they will do less writing instruction. It just won't be an important part of their day. They might occupy all the minutes with that reading comprehension lesson or that phonics lesson. And so I think that just really pushing into grammar and ways to teach grammar that is different than what you might find in a traditional workbook are really supportive of us as educators and the way we build our content knowledge over time and the way we grow as writers as well.
And that's why we call them invitations, because we're inviting our students and ourselves into this work.
And let's be honest, that is a shift. There are children in our classroom who maybe are coming from under-resourced neighborhoods who are experiencing school in a way that is not affirming. And so when we are asking them why you would make certain choices, that is a dramatic shift to a traditional English classroom.
Absolutely. And the fact that they are bringing experiences about language to these conversations, it just, when you mentioned that, it just brought me back to a friend of mine who wrote Nourishing Caregiver Collaborations, Naval. Love her so much. Well, she talks about how people in schools will sometimes say, well, they don't have any background knowledge. And she said, yes, they do.
So
Their background knowledge might be different than what's in our textbook, but they absolutely do have background knowledge. And we need to honor that and learn more about that. And I think with our invitation to notice, we're allowing for that.
So my good friend Carrie Johnston, 5th grade teacher at the school I work at, she tells this story about this moment with a student named Natalie, who was sharing with her community of writers in their share time a piece she had written about this kind of scary moment where her neighborhood went into lockdown because there was police activity outside. And Natalie realized that in that moment that the police were coming to her door to tell her to stay inside, her mom had left and gone to the convenience store, and so she was home alone. And so in this moment of her story, she writes, "No," with a bunch of O's. And then she puts exclamation points at the end. But she also puts exclamation points at the beginning, upside down exclamation points at the beginning, many of them. And she's writing a piece in English. And I think a teacher could look at that moment where Natalie is writing that and be like, oh, Natalie doesn't know that in English, we only put it at the end. She's using this Spanish structure. But when her teacher asked her, Natalie, why did you put those exclamation points at the beginning? She goes, well, I put them at the end first, and it didn't look important enough. So I added them to the beginning.
Yeah.
But we have to be willing to pause and ask and make no assumption and to let that writer tell us about their choice.
And I have a similar story too. Emery, my own daughter, in 3rd grade, that was when we went into shutdown. And so I was her teacher for the end of that school year. And she had written her fairy tale. And I had noticed that she'd capitalized every B. Every B was capitalized. And so I asked her, talk to me about your choice. Why'd you choose to capitalize every B in the story? And she said, because, Mom, I don't know which way the B goes. And I just don't want to deal with it. I'd rather just get all of my writing down and come back to that later. And I would have not have known that had I not asked her. And I knew we were dealing with her dysgraphia and things, but I wouldn't have thought that was why she was doing it. And I think that taking that back into the classroom, the importance of not just making those assumptions that they don't know or that they're just too lazy, that they really do have a purpose behind what they're doing a lot of times.
When we pause and ask instead of assume, we learn so much about what our students actually know and what they're trying to do as writers. And I think that's where the power piece really lands. Our students come in with so many linguistic resources. They know how to communicate. They know how to make meaning. What we're doing is adding to their toolkit. when a student brings their whole linguistic self into the classroom, we honor it. When they experiment as writers, we're curious about that alongside them. And then we invite them to look at what published authors are doing and decide when they want to use those patterns for their own purposes. So they're not being corrected, they're being equipped. And that's really the heart of what we mean by power. Caroline, do you want to give us any kind of call to action or closing thoughts here?
So I guess with this analysis of the power part of patterns of power, my call to teachers is for the teacher to release some of the power that they hold as they walk into a space that is just part of the natural dynamics of teacher and student, and to lean in and really listen so that the students who come in powerful can step into their own power, take on conventions of language, utilize it for their purposes and what matters to them.
And confidently continue their journey as writers. Love that. Caroline, Whitney, it's been a pleasure having this conversation together. Listeners, take care.